Comments for our guest, Paul Jacob, who is the president of Citizens in Charge, also the senior advisor at the Samuel Adams Alliance. He's appearing this evening at 7:30, room 222. That was a TV show back in the 70s of Cabell Hall. I wonder if Mr. Dixon will be there. All right, the address tonight is Why Government Wants You to Shut Up and Pay Your Taxes, a Tax on Voters, and what a wonderful setting for this speech, right in the heart of Charlottesville, sponsored by Students for Individual Liberty at UVA. Again, that's free for you tonight at 7:30. All right, so we talked about term limits, and certainly there's a frustration there, especially after all the work you did, having it struck down by a court ruling that was questionable. But there are other things you have worked on, including curtailing government spending, promoting free markets, eminent domain abuse. Can we talk briefly about each one of those areas, the importance of those things that you've been working on?
Certainly. One of the court decisions that I think has been the most outrageous, and boy, there's a lot of competition for that prize, was the Kelo decision of several years ago, where they ruled that basically government can take somebody's property simply to give it to another private person, a developer usually, who's going to build something that will provide more tax revenue, and that the public use is politicians getting more tax dollars. You know, if the economy's zooming and there's more tax dollars, great. But the idea that they can steal people's property is outrageous. And this is not a decision where, 60% of the people were upset or 70%. Polls after the Kelo decision showed over 90% of the public was against that decision. And of course they were, because it puts our country in a position where they can basically take anybody's property at any time if you're not, frankly, producing enough revenue for your elected officials who are supposed to be your servants. I've written extensively about it. I've worked on a number of initiatives around the country to go after that issue and reform eminent domain so that they could not do that, so that they could only take private property for a truly public use. That battle continues. But there's a lot of opposition, and most of the opposition to eminent domain reform comes from groups like the League of Cities, the Municipal League, the League of Counties. And where do they get their money? They get their money ultimately from the very taxpayers who they're fighting. And because what happens is they get their money from state and local governments who are taking our tax dollars, laundering it by sending it to the League of Cities or these other groups, right? And then those groups spend it opposing these initiatives, fighting reform in legislatures, lobbying against it, and that sort of thing. So this is an issue, I think, also that allows people to realize just how serious the problem is and how out of control government is. This isn't a close call. This is obvious, and it sends a message that our government doesn't much care for what we think. They want more money, more money, more money. Now, one of the other issues that I've been very much involved in addition to tax reform and lowering taxes, especially on things like food and medicine and things like that around the country where oftentimes they're still taxed, very regressive taxes, I've also worked on a thing called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is the idea of putting government on a diet, basically. Government would continue to grow year to year, but its growth would be capped by the rate of population growth and the rate of inflation.
Now, didn't something like this go into effect in Colorado?
It did. And in fact, in Colorado, they've had a real boom in the economy after it went into effect. Now, they also had a recession because of some of the drought and agricultural problems they had. And the measure in Colorado didn't allow government to come back up and grow as fast as some people wanted. The voters suspended it on a narrow vote a few years ago, and it will come back into effect. I'm not sure exactly what year it comes back into effect. But these are the idea behind this is when times are good, money rolls in the door. And what tends to happen is that government spends it all trying to find new constituencies to basically please and buy off.
And buy, right.
And so then when times get tough or even just not quite as rosy, they start to complain, well, we can't grow as fast as we want, we need a tax increase. This is feast and famine, very bad budgeting and planning, and what the Taxpayer Bill of Rights would do is say, look, if you want to grow faster than the natural rate of inflation and population growth, then you have to go to the voters and get approval. That seems to be only right, but it's opposed vehemently not only by people who you'd expect, public employees unions, teachers unions, folks who work for government, but also by a lot of the corporate interests who get all kinds of what I like to call daddy welfare from the government. So it's the kind of thing where there's a very powerful, well-funded opposition. But these are great laws, and I think you're going to see more and more people pushing to enact those. About the only way to do it, though, is through the initiative process. And we are seeing all kinds of attacks around the country, not just on me personally, but on the process. And it follows term limits and taxpayer bill of rights, spending limits, tax limits. The folks who love big government hate the initiative process and want to destroy it if at all possible. And what they're doing is trying to restrict it throughout the country, making it much tougher, much more expensive to do an initiative. And it even has gotten to the point where they're trying to go after folks who have used it extensively. Through term limits, through the Taxpayer Bill of Rights and eminent domain reform, I've probably been involved in as many petition drives around the country as anybody. And we worked on a petition in Oklahoma in 2005. I was an advisor advising a local guy who wanted to do these issues. A petition company came in, worked with him to hire circulators to run the drive. They asked state officials what the rules were. They were told the rules. They followed the rules. After the fact, the state Supreme Court, in order to throw out 300,000 voter signatures, changed those rules, and now is trying, the Attorney General who opposed the initiative has filed a criminal indictment against Rick Carpenter, the gentleman from Tulsa, Oklahoma, who proposed the initiative, against Susan Johnson, the head of this petition company, that just happens to do issues like term limits and tax limits around the country, and myself. And of course, one of the reasons they want to go after me is because they'd like to go after some of the people who I've worked with, who have written checks, who have helped fund these efforts around the country, and basically scare us. They like to intimidate people not to use this process. And they are charging me with a felony of conspiracy to violate the petition law there, when the reality is if we conspired to do anything, it was to find out what the rules were and follow them. It carries, Rob, a 10-year prison term and a $25,000 fine. I can tell you I am not a wealthy man, but the $25,000 fine I haven't really thought twice about. 10 years in prison, I've got 3 kids. This is a devastating attack, and it's the kind of thing that I don't know what I can do but to stand up and fight against it, because we're innocent, and for a politician to use these kind of vicious, politically motivated prosecutions against people, well, it's the very antithesis of what America is all about. We're supposed to be a country in which you can disagree politically with someone, you can have your own ideas, you can speak out and be active about those political ideas, and you don't have to worry that if you lose the election there's going to be a knock on your door in the middle of the night. And this prosecution is that knock on the door in the middle of the night.
These are, as my wife would call them, sore winners.
Yes. Yes, they were able to throw this thing off the ballot on ridiculous legal jujitsu, but that wasn't enough, because they know that it can come right back through the initiative process. Now, other people in Oklahoma, some suggest that the reason the Attorney General did this is because there's a term limits measure that's trying to make the ballot that would term limit the Attorney General and other statewide officials. Someone else suggested to me, no, they're doing this because of the Trans-Texas Corridor, which is going to require taking a whole lot of people's property through eminent domain, and they're worried that Oklahoma could be stopped by an initiative. Well, I don't know which one it is, Rob, but I can tell you it's probably D, all of the above.
Right.
Because the initiative process is always used to do things that the powerful folks who control our legislatures, both the special interest and those politicians, don't want the people to do. So of course this process is going to constantly be under attack. It's the one way, it's in essence, it's David up against Goliath, and the initiative process is our slingshot. And they'd like to take away the slingshot.
We're going to talk more about this, because I certainly have my own experiences with that, and I want to talk a little bit about how it could apply to Virginia. News